So welcome everyone to our panel discussion on saving big in daily practice. I am Meredith Jones. I'm an emergency vet and a financial coach, and I am in Virginia, and I'm a co-founder of the Veterinary Financial Summit. Phil?
Hi, Phil Zeltzman. I'm the other co-founder of the Veterinary Financial Summit, and I'm a board-certified surgeon in Pennsylvania. So tonight's very practical conversation is hosted by the Vet Financial Summit, which is both a conference and a community. This is really the only comprehensive platform that's entirely dedicated to educating colleagues about personal finance and practice finance. In fact, our next virtual summit is on September 18 and 19, and you can find more information and sign up at vetfinancialsummit.com. Let's get started.
All right, so I'm going to start by introducing Nicole Clausen. So Nicole is a veterinary inventory consultant and educator, and she is the founder of the Veterinary Inventory Strategy Network. Nicole, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so we're going to start with our first question for everybody, and we're going to introduce each panelist as we ask our first question. So Nicole, how do practice owners often get taken for a ride with inventory and suppliers due to a lack of knowledge?
Sure, that's a great question. So I think there's a couple different aspects here. So the first one often comes from our reps, just because there is so little education about inventory management in the veterinary space that often a rep will come in and say, hey, this is kind of my recommended order. And a lot of times practice owners or someone will just be like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. But the number of phone calls that I've gotten from inventory managers that placed a large bulk order without really checking with anyone, and then all of a sudden the practice owner has this giant bill come due and they're struggling to meet payroll. So that's, I think, one of the biggest ones that I see, but also not only from kind of the industry side of it, but working in the practice is oftentimes I'll see practice owners delegate managing inventory to somebody else, not really understanding the ins and the outs and the nuances of it. And there's okay, I don't want to say often, but there are cases of theft and embezzlement that happen because only one person knows what's going on. And so we're talking like tens of thousands of dollars. Not only that, but you also run into theft with DEA controlled substances. The number of times that I've heard of managers or inventory managers stealing these, really important substances because no one else really knew what was happening and there wasn't a lot of checks and balances in practice. So I guess that's, probably the two biggest things that I see.
Yeah, definitely important things to watch for.
Okay, let's ask the same question to Cheryl McKenna, who is the Business Development Director for Merchant Advocate, which is a service that saves veterinary clinics on credit card processing fees. So Cheryl, how would you answer this question? How do practice owners get taken for a ride with credit card transactions and merchant fees?
Great. So merchant services is actually unregulated. So merchant services, when a client pays a practice with a credit card, right? Very, very complicated. I'm sure that anyone on this webinar, if you go back and you look at your statement and you look at all the acronyms on that statement, you would be absolutely flabbergasted because you probably know what maybe 2% of those mean. So to mirror what Nicole said, lack of education, and also I think that we all tend to live within our genius, right? So merchant services is complicated. It is also unregulated. It's almost completely unregulated. And processors can raise rates or add fees whenever they like. They don't even need to notify a client before they do that. So rates can go up for a practice multiple times a year. And also there's plenty of sales representatives in the merchant services industry. They do not have to have any education or training. They just get a title and they go out there and they sell the merchant services. Sometimes they're very personable, but they're not necessarily held to any ethical standard. So you must accept credit card payments in your business. It's just a necessity nowadays. And a lot of times with everything else that goes on and the lack of education and the lack of regulation, people just, they believe what these representatives and what these merchant processors are telling them. And it ends up that they are paying way too much to take the client credit card payments.
All right, so Rachel, so you are the founder of Amwell Data Services, and that's a full-service, independent veterinary laboratory consulting agency, which is a mouthful.
I know, sorry.
No worries. So, Rachel, can you tell us, how do practice owners get taken for a ride with lab fees and just lab equipment and supplies in general?
Sure. So it's this continued theme here of lack of knowledge and, zone of genius, maybe, that not being their forte, which is totally fair. There's a lot of different options when it comes to diagnostic, like test providers, test types themselves, what can be ran in-house, what has to be at a reference lab, that sort of stuff. So there's actually a lot of options, and I feel that some practices maybe don't have the time to explore those options to see what might actually be the best fit for them in the long run. It might just be like what their practice owner friends do, or what the practice before them did, or wherever they interned or externed at, or a combination. So there's a lot of solutions that can be customized for them. And some contracts can get pretty pricey in terms of the obligations, in terms of the length of the contract, or the stipulations, or exclusivity agreements, or anything like that. So yeah, there's definitely options, but there's no one, I feel like different reference labs or different labs pitch themselves to practices, and there's not really like a middleman to help the practice make sense of the best option. And one of the things that kind of frustrates me is when I see a diagnostic company advertising a cost for, like, let's say a CBC, like a certain volume of CBCs a day, and they say, oh, it's going to cost you, $10 a run. It's not, but it's going to cost you $10 a run. But actually, that's just the cost for reagents. That's not the cost for the machine price, or the lease, or the staff labor, or anything else. So, if practice owners are making decisions based solely on the numbers that are provided by those diagnostic providers, that can get kind of tricky too, because you have to think about your labor and everything else. So there's a lot of gray areas, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Of course, they typically provide the numbers that make them look good or better than their friends, right?
Yeah, that's,
It sounds like there's a ton of overlap here with if the practice owners are making decisions solely on the numbers provided, right? So all of us, that's what we help with, because I feel like we're kind of managing these different types of expenses just because there's so much to do at a practice. I mean, we all know how busy practices are, and you can't be all things to all people, right? You cannot wear every single hat that's in a practice. So.
Great point.
So after these first thoughts, please share with us other mistakes that you see practice owners make in your area of expertise. So let's start with Nicole.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest mistakes that I see with inventory is just kind of carrying on this mindset of, well, we've always done it this way. And I think that touches on a number of different things, right? So if we think about, I would love for the practice owner to be able to, you know, work on their business, see patients, whatever that dream success day looks like for them, because it usually doesn't involve managing inventory. So I really like to empower them to find a team member who has that inventory mindset, who's detail oriented, who's strategic, a little bit type A, and kind of learn how to run the inventory successfully. What I also see is sometimes there is this scarcity mindset, right? The thought of, I have to keep, 15 types of antibiotics on the shelf for that one potential busload of Great Danes that comes in. And so I like to think of it more strategically to say, okay, what are we actually using or selling in a time frame? Not necessarily what are we just keeping on the shelf, because that's what we've always done. And so sometimes when you're just starting out, it can be a little nerve-wracking to, change how we're doing things. But your practice management system can be a good tool in learning and understanding what you're using and selling. And there's always like a couple mindsets that I always like to keep in mind when it comes to managing inventory. And it's like the first is to think of it through the lens of being a detective, not a perfectionist. So rather than thinking, I'm doing such a horrible job at this, to think, oh, this is interesting. I wonder why this happened, or I wonder why we ran out of this. What systems and what can we put in place so this doesn't happen again? Another one is to try things and be curious, because of course there's best practices with an inventory. There's best practices, with Rachel and with Cheryl, but it's kind of taking that time to learn the best practices and then try things in your practice to see what works the best, because all practices have a different situation, a unique vision, all sorts of uniqueness. And so that's what another big mistake is. But I think the biggest one is just hiring an inventory manager or somebody who can really own that zone of the practice, and then developing their skills and helping them with resources so they can really take over that area of the hospital with some checks and balances, so that you can get back to what matters most, whether that's seeing your patients, having a day off, whatever it might be. So those are just kind of some things that I see.
So Nicole, are you saying that the practice owner shouldn't be going through shelves and placing orders?
Correct. Please don't be doing that. Please.
Wow.
So because I veterinarians, you have a skill that no one else in your practice has, and that's where your time is valuable. It's in seeing patients, caring and seeing your clients, developing those relationships, because I can't go into surgery, but you bet I can place an order. So I think it's really just thinking, okay, where is my time most valuable? Where do I want to spend that time? And who can I help to get me support? Who can I get to help me support myself in other areas of the practice? So that's what I really call upon practice owners. And I know sometimes it can be hard to find somebody who is talented and knowledgeable at managing inventory. So that's definitely not lost on me, but I would love to help empower veterinarians to kind of get to that place where they feel comfortable kind of handing that off.
So hold on. Are you also saying that vets shouldn't be comparing prices between supplier A and supplier B and supplier C? They should delegate that?
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. Please delegate. Delegate is your friend.
Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that, because I'm not sure everybody knew that. So Rachel, tell us more pitfalls we might fall into.
So there's two big things that come to the front of my mind. First thing is missed billing charges. I think there's a statistic by AHA that says 17%, an estimated 17% of all lab billing is missed. which means not only is the practice missing out on that profit, but they already paid for the testing materials, and they already paid for maybe the like machines to have run those tests, and they've already paid their staff to do it. So you're not, you're not going to miss a staff. I hope you're not going to miss a staff paycheck. You know what I mean? Like that's a done deal. Your IDEX bill, your Antec bill, that's going to happen. And then, but you didn't actually, get all that money in the bank that you should have, that was rightfully due to you, just because things fell through the cracks. So, we're nearing end of month. So here's a reminder to all those practice managers, go and audit your invoices and double check that you aren't, leaving money on the table that should be in your pocket. So another issue is the pricing of laboratory testing. I don't think that there's like a magic formula. At least I haven't found one to date. And if I do ever come across one, I'll be happy to share it. But there's some practices I know of that if the test costs them a certain price, they just double it, or it's like 2.5 times. And that's not actually the best way to price testing, because like the price of the test, let's say it's a chemistry panel. Let's say it costs you, we'll just say it's $50. Don't charge your client like a straight 100, because you're paying for staff labor, you're paying for the machines, you're paying for those intermittent reruns that sometimes have to be done if something happened, something happened to the machine, even like lost power and lost the test and had to restart, even if it's something like out of your control. But laboratory pricing is really like not a detailed art, but there's some finesse to it. It is detailed, and I know that that's not everyone's forte. So does the owner of the practice need to sit there and break this down? No. Just like what Nicole was saying about delegate it, I think delegating really makes people kind of more powerful. It gives them back so much time. It goes to opportunity cost of, the best use of your time, and what else are you, what better things could you be doing? So, but it's definitely something that needs to be done strategically and relatively often, because we all know costs go up, not down.
Yeah. I just want to like kind of piggyback on what you said about the chart audits. I love auditing charts because missed charges are such a huge thing. And so one of the things I find really common, like for injectables, is people will charge a flat like $25 for an injectable. But like my dog is Tank, he is 150 pounds. And I also have another dog, Ollie, who's 16 pounds. I guarantee you that Tank is going to need a much bigger dose than anything than Ollie ever would. And so sometimes I'll see people just charge like a flat fee for Serenia. But oftentimes when I'm auditing and I'm doing an analysis of their system, I'm finding that on average, the cost is actually higher than the price of that item. So, just paying attention. So that's another big thing. And then, yeah, to Rachel's point, like chart audits provide so much information for you. And I think it also not only helps you catch missed charges, but it also helps you find patterns and trends that are continually getting missed, so that you can develop processes and standard operating procedures for your team, so that we're no longer continuing to miss those and kind of like, just keep repeating the same mistakes.
Excellent, thank you. So Cheryl, share some more pitfalls with us, please.
Well, one of the mistakes that I see a lot of practices make is when they are either brand new and they need to obtain merchant services, or they're in a merchant service, they have a service, but then they have someone call them up or knock on the door and ask them to switch providers. So again, it's an unregulated industry, and pretty much anyone can sell merchant services. It wasn't interesting, it was actually kind of sad, but luckily we helped the practice avoid it. But I have a practice in San Antonio, and I've been working with them for a while, They did not like their merchant services because it didn't integrate the way they wanted it to. So they had a conversation with someone and they sent me this email and they said, what's our current pricing? Well, and I always know when someone sends me an email saying, what's our current pricing, that they're either shopping or they, someone has come in and wants to do an analysis for them. And that's, you know, you really need someone to look at any merchant services contract that you're given, okay? The proposal almost always looks a lot better than what your merchant statement is going to look like when you get that first one. So in this particular case, I crunched the numbers. I said, all right, I called them up. I said, okay, guys, what's going on? And they were like, well, this really great guy came in and we love him and we're high-fiving everybody. And I'm like, okay, all right. So just send me the proposal. And they sent me the proposal and I was like, let's go ahead and ask him for the agreement that you're not going to sign anything. So they sent that all to me. I crunched the numbers. I called them back and I said, so if you had signed this contract, you would be paying another $9,672 a month. And they said a year. And I said, no, a month. And they were so upset because, you know, it was presented to them as if they were going to be saving money. And that's almost what, $112,000, $113,000 a year more that they would be spending. Are you kidding me? So the pitfalls are, you really have to pay attention. You absolutely have to pay attention. Maybe you have an accountant who can help you out. Maybe there's someone on your team, or if not, just go find someone who can look at it for you and who knows. And certainly never sign a contract that requires you to be in it for any, I mean, it should be month to month, because if someone is going to take care of you as a business owner, then you will want to continue to do business with them most likely. But you should never sign a contract where you're going to be forced to do business with someone, even if they're not taking care of you and your business. So absolutely be very careful.
But what if the guy high fives and brings donuts?
Well, then you get the added bonus of a donut, which is really great. But I guarantee you, how many donuts could you buy for $9,672? So like all
you can buy the store, just buy the store.
Like custom donuts you could be buying for that amount of money. So yeah, be careful.
That's a lot of Krispy Kremes.
Yeah, that's a lot of Krispy Kremes delivered to you. You don't even have to go to Krispy Kreme for that amount of money, right?
Right. All right. So our next question, and we're going to start with Rachel for this one. How do you typically work with practice owners to prevent them from getting taken for a ride?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is the contracts again. So I feel like this might be the, another theme of the night. So it really varies. Sometimes, right, the pitch is better, and this is contracts and lab equipment sometimes, and different diagnostic tests. The pitch is better than the reality. Like I know of people, I won't name brands here, but I know of people that are familiar with some in-house lab chemistry components that are supposed to be super easy to run and painless to run, but apparently there's issues with a lot of them. So if this is supposed to be perfect and it's never supposed to have any issues, and then it has issues and it's not just once in a blue moon, but it like reliably has issues, then are you getting credit for that? You just wasted time. Now you have to go get another one. Now that screws up your reordering points, right, Nicole? Like it's this vicious cycle. So, that's an issue. And then there's, I have a client that is setting up an in-house diagnostic reference lab, and they're really keen on a particular machine that's really lovely cutting edge technology. I'm gonna not name names here. And I said, that's really cool, but I want, I'd want to look into that more for you. I said, because I'm familiar with like what that technology is. Like I've done it like the old school way when I was in graduate school. So, let me see how this basically translates to point of care, because this is a point of care analyzer, but it's kind of the first of its kind. And I don't want the practitioner to be limited by what's on the test menu. Like, let's say they want 2 things that are on the test menu for this analyzer, but they really want 2 more components. So now they're going to have to send out 2 tests instead of just, do one in-house and send one out, and it's going to kind of complicate things. And then what happens if you just paid $20,000 for this machine and then the company goes out of business, and now you have, what I mean? Now you have a really nice paperweight. So, there's a lot of ways to kind of cut the cake. So it's really important that people aren't just, that they don't just fall for the sales pitch. So.
Yeah, for sure. Cheryl, how do you typically work with practice owners? Make sure they don't lose money.
Well, basically, I sit on the same side of the table as the practice owner. So it's interesting. I've been in merchant services for 23 years. It's definitely very humbling because most people hear merchant services and they're kind of like, ugh. So that's the first reaction that I generally get when I tell someone what I do. So consequently, I've got a very tough skin by now. But so what we do is we look at what merchant services a practice has, and we evaluate it to see if they are overpaying, if they have the best service, the best features, the best benefits. We're not a merchant provider. So we're processor agnostic, as we call it. And our goal is to get practices the best rates and fees and the best service. Now, I would say that 75% of the time, the clients that I work with, they keep their current merchant provider because it's a lot easier for them to not change, to stay where they're at. But we'll go through and evaluate the rates and fees, and even sometimes the equipment type, which is actually a whole nother story now that we're in COVID and there's swiping versus king and people are not trying to touch things. But anywho, but we'll go through and find every single spot that the practice is, where the practice is being overcharged, and then we'll fix that. So that would be either talking to the merchant provider, sometimes, especially, in the COVID world, really educating practice owners and teams of how they should take payments so it's the lowest cost for them, and then just making recommendations. I only get paid if the practice saves money, so that's easy, right? But yeah, it's really sitting on the same side of the table as that owner to drive the rates and fees down as much as possible and to get them the best program, because it's very complicated and it's unregulated, and you could accidentally sign to something that would be costing you $9,672 more a month. But even then, when you're in a current service, I just saved a practice $7,000 a month. I mean, it's a big practice, right? I mean, it's doing a little less than $500,000 a month, but still, think of how much they were being overcharged. They thought they were. I mean, that's why they reached out, but they had no idea it was that much. And it was a very interesting negotiation, by the way, that the sales rep came back and said some things. I was like, it was not even true. Like, so far out of the realm of reality. So anyway.
So I'd like to go back to what you just said. How much does it cost the practice when they work with you?
Nothing. So we save them money and we take a portion. So we're generating what we get paid, and we're generating money for the practice that they wouldn't have otherwise. So, I mean, I guess does it really cost nothing if it makes you money? I don't know. Nothing doesn't sound as good as making you money, right?
Yeah. All right. So Nicole, how do you typically work with practice owners to make sure they don't lose money?
So I like to meet personally, I like to meet practices where they're at. My number one, I like to educate people first and foremost and train people because I think a rising tide lifts all boats. And so if we can help people, our team members, practice owners develop skills for themselves, hopefully we can like pass this on. We can like start developing the next generation of veterinary professionals to manage inventory correctly. Like, so that's really what gets me excited. But then of course, you know, breaking it down into the nitty-gritty details, I am a big fan of spreadsheets and audit and analysis. And one of my favorite things to do is to break down and do an analysis and look at every single item in the practice, look at your profit margins, look at your markup percents, calculate your reorder points, and really just get you started with a solid foundation to see where you're at. Because I think it's one thing to start raising, woohoo for spreadsheets, absolutely. So I think it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm just gonna start managing inventory better. Well, we have to back up a couple steps and say, where am I actually at currently? Because until we really get a solid foundation and lay that foundation, we can't really build a solid inventory strategy on that. So there's been so many instances where I have seen prices that are lower than the cost of the item. So essentially practices are paying that owner to take that medication. I've seen so much like over ordering, tons of expired. I was like, okay, I have to just tell you a story. So I work on site with clients as well as remote. Of course, COVID changed that, but one of the clinics I was at, you know, the x-ray table, it was a small animal, but the x-ray table, the whole thing was filled with medications that had expired. So the whole entire x-ray table was just expired products. I have pulled literally, I'm not even kidding you, I think the most was like 90 bags of food that hadn't been sold in over 6 months that were just sitting on the shelf. So there's so many instances where there's just a lot of excess, and inventory unfortunately is just a universal struggle in veterinary medicine. And so one of the number one questions that I get asked is this the worst you've ever seen? No, it's not. Everyone struggles with inventory. And so it's like, I just want you to like, it's just one of those things. And so it's like, it's like my dream, passion, purpose in life to like educate others to make sure we just don't perpetuate the same cycle of this is what we've always done.
Great. Thank you for sharing. So, as we've discussed earlier, each one of your area of expertise is often delegated to a team member, right? So sometimes we provide amazing in-depth training and sometimes we don't. So how can we educate these team members so they don't fall into the same pitfalls we've just explained? What can we teach them to help them understand how important their role is in the practice? Cheryl, do you want to start?
That's a really great question. That's a really difficult one to answer. I would say number one is absolutely you should be looking at your statements every month. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many people don't look at their merchant services statements. They basically, some of them don't even like go online. They stopped getting it in the mail years ago, right? Because everybody went green and they have online portals, and you'd be amazed at how many people, they don't look at their statements at all. I don't even know how their accountant or bookkeeper deals with it, but and then sometimes people delegate to their accountant or bookkeeper, but a lot of times they're delegating to people who don't care as much about the bottom line as the owner, right? So to them, it's just numbers on a piece of paper, but to the owner, I mean, it's significant. It can be a significant portion of their expenses, right? Which eats into profit. So definitely they should be looking at the statements every month. There's information out there on the internet. If they have questions, there's actually quite a bit of information on merchant services. So a lot of times you can Google different things. but definitely pay attention to what your charges are and divide that by your total volume and make sure that's kind of staying even, right? So if you see a big jump, you know that there's been a price increase, but look at your statements. Even if you don't quite understand them, at least look at them so that you know that you don't understand them and you need help. Right?
Even if you save somebody $9,672 a year, that would be a really nice vacation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, of course, I'm talking about slam dunks, but if you don't have to change anything and you can save $2,000 a year and the work's being done for you, I mean, that $2,000, that goes straight to your bottom line. So
absolutely,
why not, right?
Yeah. Nicole, how would you answer that question? What can we teach our team members we delegate to?
Sure. So I think the biggest thing is just creating a checks and balance system. So I, shocker, am a big fan of key performance indicators. So I like to review every month. What are your cost of goods at? What is your total value of inventory on hand? How many products did you have expire over the last month? How many times did you run out of a medication? There's different little aspects that we can monitor without being very time intensive, so there's like these little things. We can also watch our inventory turnover, right? So that the inventory turnover is the number of times the product comes in and leaves our practice within a given year. And so that just tells us how efficient our inventory is and how long it's just sitting on the shelf for. Because unfortunately, until we sell that inventory, it's just literally money and dollar bills sitting on your shelf. And so making sure that that's efficient is going to be really important. And I think just having those conversations. So, having a regular inventory meeting with whoever is managing the inventory to check the status, get updates, see what's happening. And if you're the DEA registrant, always, 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 always see how much controlled substances are being ordered on 222 forms and Schedule 3 through 5. So always be monitoring how much controlled substances are being ordered. There was an instance where this gal, she forged a 222 form and put a ton of human medications. And the only reason why it wasn't filled and somebody found out about it is because she crossed out the date and, got sent back. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened? And so one of my biggest things when I talk about like theft and potential diversion is, if you have one person that's ordering and receiving, how easy would it for them to be to just pocket that medication? If no one's looking at the statements, if no one's looking at the invoices, if it's never received in your practice management system, you're likely not going to know that it's gone. So that's kind of one piece. The other piece is kind of, in regards to getting your team on board. And I just start with why, right? And sharing your vision. If we don't have inventory, we can't treat our patients. So first and foremost, that's, why inventory is important. But also, so I like to connect it to the why, because I think the why of different people in your practice are going to be different. So, if you have somebody who's like, I don't want to use these reorder tags, inventory is the worst, wah, 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 you can say like, hey, my goal here is to help support you by providing you with the tools, the medications, the resources you need to care for your patients. Let me help you. And so I think, just making sure that the whole culture of your practice really understands the value of inventory, because when inventory goes amok, we're talking tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in missed opportunity of revenue, profitability. So it's a huge, significant impact on the practice. So just making sure everyone's on the same page and singing off the same sheet of music.
Very good.
I
Great.
just have to say that I love Nicole's passion for inventory. It's awesome.
I get that a lot. People are like, why in the world would you even want to focus on this? And I'm like, well, so little story. When I very, very, very first started managing inventory, my only training was shake a bottle and it feels low, order it. And then she left the practice 2 days later. So I totally understand the struggle, and I have like been through the struggle myself. And so I think that's why I love it so much, is because I want to help other people avoid that struggle.
Wonder how many people here tonight do that. We can't say that in public. So Rachel, how do we empower our team members? How do we make them understand how important their job is?
So for me, I think the lab is just as important, sorry, Nicole, as the inventory. So, you know, medications, you know, coming in and out of the the pharmacy, they are kind of what we need to give patients to heal them. But the diagnostics really help us choose what path we're going to take. So, and I feel like a lot of cases are impacted by diagnostics in one way or another, whether that's preventative, whether that's, you know, emergency critical care, any of that. So I feel like most patients at the hospital are directly impacted, whether that's by time, you know, like how long it takes to get results back so then they can start a procedure, or if they're in the middle of a procedure and there's issues, you know, and they're running some like emergency diagnostics in the middle of it, or if it's, you know, stuff that gets like testing that gets sent out to a reference lab and then there's a delay, you know, for it to come back to the owner. So there's a lot of places that the lab diagnostics are used across the practice, and kind of connecting the, how do I say this? Like, it's what Nicole was saying of, you know, the why. So for me, when I was the lab manager in practice, and this isn't necessarily finance related, but I empowered all of my techs to go ahead and run another test if they felt like that one wasn't running well. Did that make sense? Like if something happened, if for whatever reason they thought, you know, a reagent didn't work right, or something was wrong with my pet, or maybe, you know, this happened or that was strange, just go ahead and rerun it, no questions asked, because it's really important for me that the entire team, you know, starting in the lab, but going from the lab to the doctors, to the techs, to everyone feels really comfortable and can trust those results that come out of that room. So, you know, when it comes to things like the financial part of the lab, so that goes back to like, you know, the consumable inventory, which is a bit of Nicole's shining space. You know, sometimes that's delegated out. And, you know, a lot of times the running of the lab work is delegated out. So if they can, you know, if the employees and the techs can know why this is important, just right, like just what Nicole was talking about of, you know, not only is it important for people to do their jobs easier and treat these patients better, but you know, it really can delay a lot of things that are happening throughout the rest of the day. You know, if you're waiting on diagnostic tests, or you have to rerun tests because something happened. I don't know if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if we could save enough money, then we could afford to raise wages for our teams more and more often. And so realistically, and I'm going to start with Nicole on this one because she is excited about this question. Realistically, can you save enough money to help practices have more money available to increase team wages?
A resounding yes across this board. I love this question because this is one of the number one reasons why I love to get inventory costs down, because either you can start finally taking a paycheck as a practice owner, or you can give your team raises. So I have a very dear client of mine who we dropped her cost of goods from 32% to 17%. And she literally gave her entire team a raise. And that is not an uncommon situation. So, I mean, I could go into like story after story after story But it really is, you know, when you save money with inventory, you're no longer having all that expired stock. You're not just having all that stock sitting on your shelf. It's moving efficiently. It's working like it should. There is so much potential to free up that cash that can be used to invest in your team, to get new equipment, to add a second location. Like, the possibilities are endless. And that's why I love reducing those inventory costs, because it gives us like that potential for hope and growth and development. And that's just so exciting to me.
All right, Rachel, what do you think?
So when I was a former lab manager, I can't speak tonight, sorry. I renegotiated the IDEX contract that the practice had. And they had already had maybe like a 5-year contract. And IDEX gave the practice $80,000. That was part of the contract. So that covered 2 analyzers that I wanted. And that covered that covered all the maintenance for all of the IDEX machines for the remainder of the contract extension for like the next 4 or 5 years. All the maintenance on all the machines are going to be paid by IDEX. So and that also left, like, basically think of it like a gift card that had like several thousand on it. So actually when COVID hit, I spoke with the practice owners, and we decided I would place a really big order just in case I needed to go out. And actually I did end up going out on leave for a bit, but we placed a $15,000 order in a day, not out of the clinic's pocket, but out of part of that contract renegotiation. So it was IDEX test promise points that, you know, we had in the bank with them. So done and paid for. And that was basically 3 months of slides and everything that the practice would need. And this was spring. So this is foaling season. This was an equine practice. This was foaling season. This was like really intense colic season, everything. So that's one example, but I would like 80K. So, you know, it was really nice. And another thing that we had done, I went back, they had, with that particular contract, different contracts have different components, but with this one, they had a rebate structure, a monthly rebate for the reference lab spend. So it was a pyramid. Like if you spend $1,000, you get this amount back. And it was really nice. It was like 40% spend back. It was a fabulous rebate. And it had like it had a ceiling though. So it said like anything that you spend above like $3,500, you only get this percent back. And I said, can we raise that? I said, there's been several times that we've hit that ceiling and we would have hit what would have been the next tier. So we would have had a higher rebate come back. You know, we're spending more with you. Can you help us out? So we did that. That was done. So that's, you know, a lot more money, a lot more money back. And just by tracking those rebates and like pushing into the next tier, that would be several $100s a year, just by keeping an eye on that.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, it looks like we've got a couple of comments, and Megan, let me know if I'm not getting your comment correctly. It looks like Megan and Ray were both suggesting online pharmacies as a way of keeping inventory costs down as well. And we're gonna go to Cheryl, of course, next, but before I do that, Nicole, Ray was asking, what would you say has more potential? Counts on current COGS or consolidating categories?
So typically I see the new, oh, I see the needle move the quickest by consolidating categories, right? So I especially look at our flea and tick products. If we're carrying 5 different types of flea and tick products, that's just diluting our reorder points and our turnover. And I always think about like the little teeny tiny baby sizes, right? Like the 4 to 9 pounds. How often are we truly selling that? And it's like often I'll go in and do an audit on someone's inventory, and I'll find that they have like 6 or 7 years worth of, flea and tick and heartworm supplies of that teeny tiny size. So I find the needle moves the quickest with kind of consolidating those categories and just narrowing it down to a primary and secondary product.
All right, very good. So Cheryl, what are your thoughts on saving money for practices in order to free up money for team wages?
Well, obviously that's a fantastic thing, right? I mean, for me, the owner really gets to decide what they're going to do with that money. I did have one owner who introduced me to a study club, and he held up this brochure for this safari that he took to Africa. I've had other people increase team wages, but sometimes it's not necessarily just about the team wages. There are other things that money can be used for in a practice to enhance the environment that the team is in. A lot of us business owners, we've taken the personality tests. We've had our team take the personality test. Not everyone is money motivated. So sometimes they want something different. Sometimes they want a gift. Sometimes they want maybe a different piece of equipment that's going to make their life easier at the practice. So yes, obviously you could definitely use that for wages, and that's a fantastic idea. But really looking at the best place to apply that, if you're looking to save money in order to benefit your team, then it might not necessarily be wages. I mean, obviously people like that as well, but it could be something else. So I would just tell everyone to kind of really look at what the practice needs to make also a happy environment. It might be something other than wages, or it might be like a little bit of a raise and then maybe something else. Maybe a team building retreat that's paid for would be great as well.
All right, excellent. So Phil, I want to make sure that we get to Q&A, and I know we had another question, but we've also had some examples that went along with that question. So if you're good with that.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah, let's open it up because we do have some good questions in the chat. And also, you all can certainly feel free to unmute yourselves and ask a question as well, because we want to make this as interactive as possible. And so I see that there's a question for Nicole from Daniel. So Nicole, what tips do you have for startups who are offered deals on medications and preventatives by the drug reps? And is there ever a time to buy in bulk?
Okay, first of all, Daniel, this is such a great question. So yes, there is room for that deals, but it's doing it strategically, right? So if you know, especially if you're a brand new startup practice, you have the buy one, get one, you can do that on products without a shadow of a doubt that you are going to sell very quickly, right? We're talking your movers and your shakers, right? So it's probably not going to be like cephalexin or gabapentin, but maybe it's Apoquel or your vaccines or your heartworm prevention. But I always think about it through the lens of I want to use or sell it before I ever have to pay for it. So depending on the terms, depending on anything like that, that's how we can start to look at our quantities. Same thing goes for bulk purchases. Let's say, for example, that you have a special 90-day terms before you have to buy that. I would only order what you're going to use or sell within that 90-day time period. So that kind of involves looking at your practice management system to look at your usage, calculate your average daily use, and then purchase that way, because I have just run into so many situations where they kind of buy in bulk based upon the rep's recommendation, and all of a sudden they can't pay that giant bill or a ton of stock expires. So it's really just looking and evaluating what you're actually going to use or sell in that particular time frame, because there is a place, because you can get great savings. We just want to make sure that it's real savings and you're not just going to have everything expire at the end of the time period.
Mm-hmm.
That's good. That's kind of like Costco, right? So it's only a good deal if you're going to use it all before it expires, because if you buy 8 things of ketchup for the price of 6, but you only used 5, there you go.
Doesn't help you. Exactly.
Yeah.
And on that note, sometimes I love talking about inventory in terms of grocery shopping. So it's great that you brought that up. Sometimes we get in this habit of placing orders every day or purchasing so often, but we forget about the indirect labor costs of this. And so I always say, okay, if you know your family goes through a bag of apples every single week, do you drive to the store every day to buy 1 apple? Or do you buy a bag of apples at the beginning of the week? So again, it's just kind of balancing our labor costs, our holding costs, and any savings we might get.
Okay, excellent. So I do want to take a moment and just thank everyone for attending. We're going to continue with the Q&A, but I wanted to make sure that that we just said thanks for joining us tonight. And if you want to learn more about the Vet Financial Summit, go to vetfinancialsummit.com. Our conference is going to be September 18th and 19th. It's going to be virtual, and we're going to be talking about everything practice finance as well as personal finance. And so certainly feel free to take a look at us there. And so Grace Kemp had an excellent question. And Grace, if you want to unmute yourself and ask, feel free to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to read it. All right. So Grace is asking, what are the basics of approaching laboratory providers to ask for negotiations? And where do we even start? And do we start by decreasing costs by a certain percentage, or what do we do?
So this makes me think that you already have a contract that you're trying to kind of see what can be done. If you are looking at getting a contract, okay, you already have one with IDEX. Okay, so so there's some wiggle room. Depending on how your contract is structured, you're probably in it for a particular length of time, probably in it for a particular annual spend, like minimum annual spend. Yeah, 6 years. I'm sorry. That's the norm, but I'm sorry. So I know that pain. Are you having trouble hitting your annual spend, or are you just trying to get costs down where you can? I'll keep trying to answer your question, and you can be as open as you want. I'd say you don't have to be, but okay. So there's some things that can be done, depending on if your volumes are expected to change or if your spending is expected to change. You might be able to renegotiate a bit. What you see in terms of the list IDEX book price for a test is not probably what you're paying. You're probably paying less. I should hope you're paying less. They can have a discounted list menu for you that's like 2 pages long, and you pick the tests that are going to be on there. So they can discount those off of list to a certain amount. They will move that percentage by, I guess, some level of their discretion, but it can be a lot, and I won't quite name it because it's not always fair to the practices that aren't blessed with that gift of that level of percentage, but it's a lot. So there's a discounted spending list, and then there's sometimes depending on how your contract is structured, you can change some pricing, like the spend, but you can't change, you can't lock in what you're paying for light force now. You can't lock that in for the next for the remainder of your contract. And that's a little frustrating for me when I was in practice as a lab manager. But what I would do to help with that is I would buy what I could at the end of the year that I knew was going to last. Like at the practice I was at, we had 2 ProCyte DXs. And so I bought like 15 reagent kits before they went up by like $40 a piece. You know what I mean? Like they were going to go up the next day, and I just bought them all. They're room temperature. I just stacked them, and I had used them all within like 3 months. So that was another thing. But if you do want to talk to them, how you can approach them is go through your rep, and you're welcome to get in touch with me another time if you'd like to talk more about this. But you can get in touch with your rep and kind of let them know the concerns you're having. They really like a longer term and kind of getting the practice in a contract for a longer term. So if you want to try to move some numbers down or spread them out a different way, if you say like, hey, I'm willing to do this for like a 2-year extension, that could definitely catch their eye. But they're kind of open to some stuff, but it's probably not widely discussed. I don't know if that makes sense. Okay, you're welcome.
So in other words, people should hire you before they sign on the dotted line.
That would be best, you know, and I offer free consultations if someone just wants to chat about something real quick. But yeah, it's, you know, these contracts can get really sticky. And they also have exclusivity agreements, right? Like I'm familiar with a practice that had, I think this was like kind of almost industry norm, but it was 90% of lab spend had to be to IDEX. And I have not known IDEX yet. I have not yet known of IDEX enforcing that exclusivity agreement, but all they would need to do would be subpoena your invoices, and that could get really costly. So it's not anything I advise about trying to kind of skirt the edges of the contract. You can, if you, so I assume you have in-house like point of care machines with IDEX, like some of their suite. So you can decide based on time and labor opportunity costs to push some things out to the reference lab and bring some things in-house on your machine, So maybe some like wellness type stuff you can send out and then you just get it the next morning or, you know, 2 days, and then you aren't paying your techs to run it, or so they can do something else with their time. But you can crunch the numbers and see kind of what makes sense, including labor, to kind of push it out to the reference lab or bring it in-house, because that won't really change your spend by that much. It might, but it might free your staff up to do more. So that's another kind of option.
Thank you for that. Meredith, do you see another good question?
Not in the chat right now. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And otherwise, Phil, I'm going to let you go ahead with either another question or comment.
Well, I have a comment. I mean, this was an amazing discussion. You basically explained how to save, I mean, combined, the 3 of you, a whole lot of money. And man, I really wish there were a forum where we could talk about these things openly. Meredith, have you ever heard of a platform where people can talk about money and not be embarrassed about it?
I have. It's called the Veterinary Financial Summit. And so we are both a conference and a community, meaning that if you sign up to attend the summit, you will immediately join our community, which is on Facebook, and we have a lot of great discussions about money. You can post questions there anytime. We do money wins every month, and we do a lot of fun things there. So vetfinancialsummit.com. You can also actually join the community anytime, even if you're not sure yet if you can go to the summit. And the summit is again September 18th, 19th. And you know, if you like the kind of information that we shared tonight, we have a whole lot more to share.
So we already shared the contact information from Rachel. Mm-hmm. Heather, can you please share the info for Nicole and Cheryl as well? I don't think I've seen it.
While she's typing that, I did want to add just like one quick little thing.
Mhm.
So another reason why I love inventory, especially for practice owners, is to thinking about your end game in wanting to sell your practice and retire. So this year I had a gal, she came to me, she's a very dear client now. She tried to sell her practice, but her cost of goods were so high that they wouldn't actually sell her practice. And so that was her retirement plan, was selling this practice. And both of her and her husband practicing veterinarians, they co-owner of the practice. And so we were able to get her cost of goods down, 32 to 21% at that time. And that equaled $350,000 per year, which translates to a huge jump EBITDA wise. And she's now going to be able to sell her practice, retire, spend time with her grandbabies, do what she wants. So even if inventory seems like this insignificant thing, just think about it, because it really impacts the long-term success of, your practice, but also your retirement plan. So
Yeah, huge
Such a good
impact
point.
all around.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay,
right.
well, that was great. The contact information is now officially in the chat, so feel free to copy and paste. This
I'm
was
gonna put
great,
my cell
ladies.
phone here too.
I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say I'll add my cell phone too. So feel free to, if you ever have questions, you can email or call me.
All right.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I want to thank our attendees for joining us tonight and our lovely ladies for sharing all this information. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us, and I hope to see everybody at the Vet Financial Summit, because it's going to be great.
Thank you.
We're super excited. Yeah, and Cheryl's actually one of our partners this year, as well as last year. So, okay, we do have some more questions coming through. All right, so I want to make sure we don't miss any questions that you guys have. So Grace is asking, Nicole, can you just explain for us the basics of cost of goods sold?
Absolutely. So cost of goods sold, you can think of it as anything that's needed to care for your patients. So that includes pharmaceuticals, diets, in-house reference lab, cremation actually, but it doesn't include office supplies, janitorial supplies, anything like that. AHA has a great chart of accounts that's free that kind of lists out everything that's included in cost of goods. But you can think, like, generally speaking, if it's related to caring for a patient, it's likely a cost of goods sold. And it's actually very easy to calculate. You can look at your P&L. It's not often as super accurate in your practice management system. So I like looking at it from your P&L first. And then you can also, once you kind of like have that whole total number, you can divide it by your revenue for that same time period to get your cost of goods sold as a percentage of revenue. But the AHA chart of accounts is a great place to start to see kind of what's included in that category.
All right, thank you, Nicole. Excellent. Okay, and so Nicole was actually asking Nicole a question about what's your opinion on online pharmacies?
Sure. So I think that online pharmacies definitely have our place, because I think especially in this day and age, our clients are wanting that convenience. Sometimes I think we think and automatically assume it's because of the cost and the price. But one of my clients actually, I was working with them and they were like, oh, I'm just having so many Chewy and 1-800 pet meds requests. And I was like, okay, do you have an online pharmacy? And they're like, no. And I was like, okay, let's look at your prices then. Their prices were actually like $10 cheaper than Chewy, but clients were still going to outside online pharmacies because they wanted that convenience. So I know for me, I'm like, doing 60 million, 100,000 things during the day. And so usually I realize like my dog is low on medication in the evening. And if I just had like a convenient way to order it, that'd be great. So I think meeting our clients kind of in that convenience factor is great. I think it's also helpful to make sure we aren't having a ton of product on our shelf, right? Kind of like the random like flea and tick prevention that only a couple people buy, similar things, or the huge bags of food. So I definitely think they have their place, but I don't think, getting rid of our in-house pharmacy completely is the right idea, because for many practices, it's a profit and a revenue center. So it's kind of balancing that act, because with online pharmacies, typically your margins aren't as great. So it's like, we don't want to just get rid of everything completely, but we still want to have that option available for our clients and use it as a tool for determining, what we should carry in-house versus out of, or like to our online pharmacy. So some of the things you can, look at, like if it's vet exclusive, right, that's good to keep in-house. There's just some other things you can look at. If it's super risky, like I know a bunch of people who just script out tramadol, they don't even carry it in-house anymore. And I think that's starting to become a more and more common trend. So, just not even having it in-house, because, at a practice I was at a long time ago, experienced theft of tramadol. And that's a very common scenario. So I do think they have their place.
All right, very good. All right, well, that's all the questions that we have here tonight. And thanks again so much for joining us, all the attendees. Cheryl, thank you so much. Nicole and Rachel as well. And thanks to Heather for keeping us organized tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. It was fun. Thanks so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
This was great. Thank you.
Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.